trend is going, but the timing is very hard to get. For example, you know, I had believed, I had predicted, or I even took the domain name out in 2007, that we'd have the Panic of '08. I took the domain name out, the Panic of '08. But then I thought it would collapse in 2010. It didn't, because you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. I had no idea they would make up a thing called quantitative easing. I had no idea they would bail out banks, because they call America capitalism. That's not capitalism when you bail out too big to fail. There's no such thing in capitalism. You don't know that they're going to be shoveling out some $17 trillion, the Federal Reserve, to banks around the world. That's one of the difficulties. The other one is that, you know, you're human, and there are wild cards out there.
Sure.
So you never know what wild cards are going to play. You don't know if it's going to be a man-made disaster, like the ones they're making as we're speaking, or a Fukushima, or a Katrina. So, but as far as my track record goes, you know, from me coining the term clean food back in 1993 to the 1987 stock market crash to the Panic of '08, you know, you could see where the trend lines are going. But again, the timing is tough. And
that's what I was going to ask you about next, actually. It's funny you mentioned that. I mean, you've been doing this since 1980. I mean, over 30 years you've been predicting things, and other people have tried. They've come and gone since then. But you usually go a little farther than most of them do by putting a timeline on a lot of your predictions. So I know a good magician never reveals any secrets. But where do you come up with the time element in a good prediction? Knowing that there's so many variables out there, how do you really implement that time element?
It's difficult, you know. So I said the timing is different. You feel like if I was wrong on the things that I'm usually wrong about, is that I think people are going to click into it sooner than it happens, and that's where my leverage is off. For example, look at the news now. They beheaded 3 people. Everybody, ISIS is everywhere. ISIS, ISIS, ISIS. They beheaded 3 people, these evil, demonic maniacs. Well, to which I look at and I say, oh yeah, beheadings are really bad. How many people did Israel just kill over there in Gaza? It was only 2,100. They were bombed. How many did America kill in Iraq and Afghanistan since these wars began? Oh, according to some reports, over 1 million.
Well, they've also, I mean, just...
Let me just finish.
Sure.
So bombing is okay, but beheadings are bad. So you see how I could have never predicted that the people would have bought these cheap lines so quickly, and see the polls reverse, where people were opposed to going to war just 2 months ago, and now they're flooding to war. So those are the things that knock your timing off.
Sure, and we'll get to ISIS too. I know I have several questions to ask you about that, but to be fair, I mean, ISIS has not just beheaded 3 people. They have displaced 500,000 people living in Iraq and several in Syria. They have ordered the female to mutilate the genitals of females everywhere, calling it some kind of a circumcision because they want to suppress lust in females. I mean, these people are a little bit more evil than I think just beheading 3 people itself.
Again, is it evil to invade a sovereign country under the lies that they had weapons of mass destruction and ties to Al-Qaeda? Is it evil to invade a nation like Libya under the guise that we're going to protect those people from this brutal dictator, and then slaughter how many tens of thousands in the meantime, and then create chaos? So it depends what you call evil. And as far as the genital mutilation and this and that, you know, hey, I got some for you. How about some enhanced interrogation techniques?
That's true. That's definitely a hot point of debate. And this is where a lot of the questions kind of play in. But let's do this. Let's get ahead to some of your trends. You've been monitoring a lot of things, and it's definitely a touchy time. So today, if you don't mind, I'd like to do something a little different than we've done in the past. You've been on the show before, but let's play a little true or false, okay? I'm going to make a series of bold statements, and I want to get your input on as many of these as we can. We got a few minutes. We're going to go down the list here, but let's start with this. What we're going to do is we're going to start off with this statement number 1. Scotland will vote to leave the United Kingdom this Thursday and declare their own statehood. True or false?
This is a 50-50. You know, it's a maybe. It's, you know, there's a lot of pressure going on. I don't know. You know, just from reading what I read, I just don't know. It's a 50-50.
I think right now the latest polls coming out of Europe and the UK itself put it at about 53 to 47, maybe 52 to 48 in favor of Scotland staying. What are the indicators you're looking for there in Scotland? Will they eventually, do you think eventually they will break away and become their own country, or will they relent or give up and stay with the UK?
Again, you know, look what's going on over in Germany. They just had an election. And the so-called fringe party that wants to get off the Deutschmark, among other things, got over 10% of the vote. They had a vote in Sweden on Sunday. 13% of the vote. Also, to stop anti-immigration. The one they called in, it's how the media works, the one that they had in Germany, they called them a right-wing group. The one in Spain, in Sweden, they called a left-wing group. I'm saying this because it really ties back to what's going on in Scotland.
Sure.
There are populist movements going on throughout Europe. Look what's going on in Catalonia. They had just about 1 million people on the streets on Sunday. They want to break away.
But the Spanish government doesn't even really recognize them in Catalonia, do they?
Excuse me?
The Spanish government doesn't even really accept that as a real risk. And much like Scotland, Catalonia is the most wealthy region of all of Spain, as is Scotland in the UK. But in Spain, it's a whole other ballgame, right? I mean, the Spanish government doesn't really want to grant them any kind of legitimacy.
Exactly. So what I'm saying is, what's important about Scotland, yes, it'll be major news if they say yes. But what's important about it is the movement.
Right.
And these populist and anti-immigration and breaking up the union movements, whether it's the European Union or the United Kingdom or Spain, this is the trend. So that's what we follow.
All right.
And the trend is for smaller and more secession movements, not only in the UK and throughout Europe, but also in the U.S.
And that's interesting because it does spark a little bit of a decentralization process from a big institution, a big power like the British Parliament. But real quick, let's change gears across the pond, back to the U.S. It's 2 years away, 2016, but I'm going to throw another 50-50 one at you real quick. Based on the trends that you've seen in the last several years, I'm going to make this prediction true or false. A Democrat will be elected to the White House in 2016.
Considering the candidates that are out there now, I would agree with you.
You would say, yes, a Democrat will be elected back to the White House in 2016?
If considering the candidates that are running on the Republican ticket now, and I guess Rand Paul is at the leader of them at this moment, whether it's Rubio, Paul, Christie, Marco Rubio, if it's any of those, the Democrats, I would agree with they would be in.
All right, let's back it up a few years. In just about 6 weeks from now, we have a midterm election on our hands. Maybe a not so bold prediction this time, but I'm going to make this one. The Republican Party will retake control of the Senate. True or false?
You know, again, I'll tell you why I wouldn't make a forecast on it. I think we're going to see a record low turnout, and that's going to determine who gets out.
All right. Well, let's visit Ukraine real quick. We're jumping all over the place here. We've got Gerald Celente with us making some bold predictions. True or false, Crimea will remain autonomous, and eventually NATO will even have to recognize them as their own individual country. Yes or no?
Nah.
Why not?
They'll be part of Russia.
Why is that?
Well, they've been since, what, 1873? No, 1783.
Okay.
So I don't think they're going anywhere.
Well, let's talk about Russia real quick then.
They'll be under Russian control.
Because Russia is rather aggravated right now. I mean, this is not a bold prediction. That's just fact. Russia's pretty aggravated at the European Union, at the U.S. Let's make this bold prediction. Vladimir Putin will finally come out and admit to Russian troops fighting in Ukraine. Yes or no?
No.
And why is that?
Well, you know, in this age of selfies and phones everywhere, all I hear about are Russian tanks coming over the border. I heard the Ukrainian president saying that Russia took out an entire city on the border. I've heard numbers anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000 Russian troops. And other than the 4 guys that they caught on the Russian border, I haven't seen photos of anything other than the aerial photo that reminded me of Colin Powell's photo of those weapons of mass destruction laboratories in Iraq. So I would think that if Russian troops were there, and I could give you an example. Go back to this past weekend's Financial Times. Go to page 3 and read the story about Russian troops fighting alongside of the Russian separatists. And you know who they quote? One guy, one person.
So without two sources, you're saying it's not a credible...
Without a lot of sources. This is not journalism.
But the Ukrainian government is clearly saying there are thousands of Russian soldiers across their border right now. Are you saying they're lying?
I'm saying they're not a very credible source.
All right. Well, let's take this a step further. We know Russia is flexing their nuclear muscles once again. They've talked about some development programs there, and clearly they're not happy about the economic sanctions. We talked about those a minute ago. True or false, Russia will take military action outside of Ukraine before 2017. What do you think?
I doubt it.
And that's...
Well, wait, let me just say that. Let me back that up.
Okay.
If there's something, another incident that like what happened in Georgia a few years ago.
Sure.
Yeah, Russia's going to do what they have to do around where they are. But I can't see Russia going to Mexico or Canada like the United States is going to Ukraine.
That's a fair point.
I don't see them going that far.
And it's been a trend, I guess you could say, that Russia, even going back to the Cold War, prefers to go to political action as opposed to military. But we'll see where that goes. Russia's a hot-button issue right now. They do seem to have far more patience than their neighbors to the southeast, North Korea. So true or false, Kim Jong-un will take military action against South Korea or Japan before 2017, keeping in mind that he's been very aggravated with Japan and South Korea with some of their action with the U.S. recently.
I would say that the only way that he would take action is if South Korea took action first.
That makes sense. So unless that happens, unless that prerequisite's there, you're saying no, they will not take military action.
No.
Let's get into something I know you talk about a lot, the economy. We mentioned Russia, and we're getting closer as we move across the map to China. Those two superpowers, along with Brazil, India, and South Africa, are coming together to form the BRICS Bank. It's an acronym there. It's a new central bank with $150 billion of backing to rival the IMF and the World Bank. Let's get your prediction on this real quick. And feel free to get a little bit more specific if you'd like. But yes or no, the launch of the BRICS Bank will seriously impact the value of the U.S. dollar.
It will impact the dollar as becoming a reserve currency. And the sanctions that the United States and NATO are putting on Russia now are going to be putting more and more money going in between rubles and yuan between the countries. So what the United States and NATO are doing are forcing the BRIC nations to do more trading among themselves using their currencies and devaluing the United States as a reserve currency. Right now, the United States is still the major reserve currency. If the trend line continues the way it is, that is going to become a reality where the United States is going to lose its authority and power as a reserve currency. When that happens, say goodbye to the United States economy, because their position as a reserve currency allows the United States to keep printing money and keeping the Ponzi scheme going.
All right, well, we've gone through a lot. Thanks for helping us go through there. But now let's move on to one of the hottest topics in the news right now. We mentioned it earlier, the war against ISIS. The U.S. is spearheading an offensive right now against the Sunni Muslims in Iraq and Syria, with airstrikes mainly, and helping to empower the Kurdish Peshmerga and the Iraqi troops. But true or false, the Obama administration will eventually deploy U.S. Marines to ground combat in Iraq? Yes or no?
Yes, and not necessarily Marines. No, they won't use that word. They'll come up with a better word, a whitewashed word. I got a word for you. How about advisors?
Well, okay, so without advisors...
Yeah, no, they're going to do it. They're already talking about it. Dempsey came out, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, saying that he believes that the time may come. This is all a setup, man. Let's get straight about it. Let's begin the story. The United States destroyed Iraq. They killed essentially 1 million people, according to some reports. Tens of millions have fled the nation. The place is up for grabs. We were going over this week by week, day by day. You read the reports going on for years. 300 killed, 120 killed, day after day. Then all of a sudden, it's falling apart. The government can't stop. This is anarchy. These are not Islamic fundamentalists. These are crazy people in a totally destroyed area that's nothing but chaos. And they're using the politicians are throwing out the religious bait so that you can make an easy enemy. I wrote about this in my book about Crusades 2000 that would happen in the new millennium. I wrote about this in 1996. Going on. Now what's happened in this total chaos, the government can't control it anymore. So here's how the story replays to the new chapter. Obama comes out, we're going to save them Christians on the mountain. We're going to save those Christians on the mountain. Oh, yeah. Hey, they didn't save all those Christians that would be slaughtered by the same people, the ISIS over in Syria, where they wiped out ancient Christian towns. No, that's different. Then we got to save them Yazidis. Everybody knows what a Yazidi is. You have one living next door to you. We got to save them, a humanitarian mission. Let's get this straight. This is a setup. It's a setup from the beginning to go back to war in Iraq. It's another military failure. Let's add it up. Anybody that can add. They lost Korean War. They lost the Vietnam War. They lost the Afghan War. They lost the Iraq War. And now, under a new name, we got the war against ISIS. You're
calling it a setup, but I think a lot of people are making the case that the problem, and as criticized as this opinion may be, a lot of military commanders are saying that the problem was leaving Iraq too early. Did the setup begin there, in your opinion?
Leave too early? You got there too early. You never should have went there. They're occupiers. Do you want to go there? Do you want to stay there? We have no business being there. They didn't want us there. So what I'm saying is, I'm in Colonial Kingston, New York. Right across the street is the courthouse, 1777 Senate House, the oldest public building. The seeds of democracy was sown here. From Washington's farewell address, to Franklin, to Jefferson, to Madison and Adams, on and on, all of the founding fathers. No foreign entanglements. And no, times weren't different. There were wars all over the world.
Well, I think it would take several months to take a boat across the Atlantic. I think you can fly there now in minutes.
The times are not different. Wars are wars. You get involved, you get involved. How quick you get involved, that's only a matter of speculation. The fact is, America was built upon the foundation of no foreign entanglements. I don't need some guy from Harvard, Princeton, Yale, whose business is bullets, bombs, and banks, to tell me the founding fathers were full of baloney. So if you want to go to war, understand the implications. And I'll say to these commanders and all of these experts, oh, you're going to fix it over there in Iraq? You got the plan? Here's one for you. Why don't you fix Detroit? After Detroit, go down to Camden. Take a trip to Trenton. Go to St. Louis. Say, how about a nice day in Ferguson? Who are these people to put in their heads that they know what to do all around the world while our nation is going down the tubes?
Very strong words from Gerald Celente. Let's move on to one last thing real quick. They've threatened it several times, talking about ISIS here, but so far the NSA and the Department of Homeland Security say there is not a real credible immediate threat from ISIS here in the U.S. Do you believe that Sunni Muslims eventually will succeed in a retaliatory strike against American civilians on U.S. soil?
I don't know who it would be, but yes, I believe that there's going to be a retaliatory strike against America at some point. I've written about this for years, about Crusades 2000. It's called Foreign Entanglements. Here's the story, Mark. You live in another country, and a drone takes out you and your family and everybody else, or you live in a city that's been bombed to smithereens. You think you want to get even. And as long as America keeps spreading its wars around the world, there are going to be people that want to get even. And then they're going to make it very convenient by putting a label on it, so then you could go to war and keep the war on terror going.
All right, well, that's a strong take from Gerald Celente. Thanks so much for coming on with us today. I know we